We spent your savings on better priorities than your kids. My fiancée said it at Thanksgiving without blinking. I just asked, better than my kids? Her mom smirked. You should be proud. You're sacrificing for her family. My dad stood up, face hard, and yelled, Name those priorities right now. We spent your savings on better priorities than your kids. She said it. Brianna, my fiancée. The woman I had bought a ring for, the woman I had been planning a life with. She said it at Thanksgiving dinner, at a table set with her mother's best china, with my dad sitting 6 feet away. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She said it the way you'd say, pass the salt. I asked her very quietly, because I had gone somewhere very cold and very still inside. Better than my kids? And her mother, Diane. Diane Carol Watkins, 61 years old, and proud of every syllable. She smiled. She picked up her wine glass. She said, You should be proud. You're sacrificing for her family. That's what a good man does. My dad who hasn't raised his voice since 2009, stood up. His chair scraped back against the hardwood. His face went hard in a way I hadn't seen since I was 17. And he looked at Diane across her own Thanksgiving table and said, Name those priorities. Right now, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up, because you need the full picture. You need every single piece of it. My name is Andy. I'm 34 years old. I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I have been a mortgage broker for 9 years. I close between 40 and 60 loans a year. I've won my brokerage's top producer award 3 times, and I pull in about $127,000 on a good year. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you that because this story is about money. Who had it, who needed it, who decided they were entitled to it, and what it cost everyone when they were wrong. I have 2 kids. Jake is 9, Gracie is 7. They live with their mom, my ex-wife Stephanie, in Cary, about 20 minutes from me. I have them every other week and every other major holiday. And I will tell you right now, without any qualification at all, those 2 kids are the best things I have ever done with my life. Jake collects old baseball cards and can tell you the career ERA of pitchers from 1987, who nobody alive remembers. Gracie draws horses obsessively, constantly, on every available surface, and she is genuinely good. She is 7, and she is genuinely good. I met Brianna at a rooftop bar downtown about 2.5 years ago. She was funny. She was sharp. She had this way of laughing where her whole face did something, and I was completely gone in about 20 minutes. She was 32. 1, worked in marketing at a mid-sized tech company, and from the very beginning, she was warm with Jake and Gracie in a way that felt real, not performed, real. I noticed that. I paid attention to that. I thought, this is someone I could build something with. Her family was another matter, but I didn't understand that yet. Diane, her mother. I met 3 months in. Brianna drove us to Charlotte for a birthday dinner. Her mom's 61st. The dinner was at a restaurant that runs about $90 a head before drinks. And when the check came, Diane looked at me with this warm, appreciating smile and said, We're so glad you came, Andy. Then she slid the check across the table toward me. I paid. Of course I paid. It was fine. I was meeting her mother for the first time. That's normal. That's hospitality. The second time I saw Diane, she mentioned, very casually, that she and Brianna's younger brother Tyler were having a hard month. Tyler, 26, worked in a warehouse part-time, had been looking for a better opportunity since approximately the Clinton administration. Had missed a car payment. Brianna looked at me in this way I had already learned to recognize. The way where her eyes did a small, soft thing that meant, this would mean so much to me. I gave Tyler $400. This is where I need you to understand something about the pattern, because it doesn't announce itself. It arrives slowly. It arrives dressed as family. Over the next 14 months, I kept track. I'm a mortgage broker. I keep records of money. I gave or transferred the following. $200 to help Diane cover a gap in her lease renewal when her landlord raised the rent. $800 to Tyler for getting back on his feet after he left the warehouse job. $2,400 for Brianna's car repair, her brakes, and a full suspension job, which I don't begrudge because that's a safety issue, but also $600 for Tyler's car, which was not a safety issue. It was a set of new rims he had picked out at a shop in Concord. I paid for Diane's 62nd birthday dinner, which was at the same restaurant as the 61st, except now there were 11 people at the table. I paid for 3 weekends when Brianna and Diane and Tyler went to the Outer Banks, because Brianna said they hadn't had a real family trip in years, and she really needed it. I didn't go. I had Jake and Gracie that weekend. And honestly, at the time, I told myself that was why. I didn't look too closely at any of it. That's the thing about the slow pattern. You don't see the shape of it while you're inside it. You just see each individual thing, and it seems reasonable, it seems temporary, it seems like something a good partner does for a family he's trying to join. I kept telling myself it was temporary. I kept telling myself that once Tyler found steady work, once Diane's finances stabilized, once Brianna and I got settled, it would change. Nobody told me that if you always say yes, people stop seeing it as generosity. They start seeing it as function. They start seeing it as a utility. Like the electricity. You don't thank the electricity. The shift happened not all at once, but in a way I can now trace back pretty clearly. About 8 months in, I had gotten a bonus from a particularly clean quarter, and I had set aside $11,000 specifically for Jake and Gracie. Specifically. I had a folder. I had talked to my financial advisor. Half of it was going into a 529 account for Jake's college fund. The other half, I was splitting between Gracie's smaller account and a new bed for Jake. He'd been on a twin since he was 5. He needed to upgrade, plus new school clothes, dentist appointments, and a weekend trip to Carowinds that I had been promising Jake for 4 months. I told Brianna about it. I was excited. I showed her the spreadsheet. Yes, I made a spreadsheet. I'm a mortgage broker. This is who I am. She looked at it and said very carefully, "That's really sweet, babe. I didn't know you had that kind of extra money available right now." I said, "It's not extra. It's their college fund. I've been saving for it." She was quiet. Then, "Tyler needs his security deposit. He found an apartment." I said nothing. I was counting to 10, which is a thing I learned in therapy and which I use more than I would prefer to admit. She said, "I'm not asking you to not do the thing for the kids. I'm just wondering if we could maybe talk about priorities here." Priorities. That word. That particular word. I filed it away. I said, "The kids are the priority, Brie. They are literally the specific priority this money is for." And she said, and I need you to hear this clearly, I know. I just feel like sometimes you're more focused on your life with Stephanie than on building a life with me." She brought Stephanie into it. She made Jake and Gracie into an argument about my ex-wife. I did not give Tyler the security deposit. I held that line. I don't want to pretend I was firm about everything. There were plenty of lines I did not hold, but that one I held. Tyler eventually got the deposit money from somewhere. I never asked from where. The engagement happened 6 months after that. I proposed in April at this little park near Jordan Lake that Brianna had mentioned twice, and I had filed away. She cried. It was real. I believe it was real. The ring was $5,800, and I chose it with my mom. Diane called me that night and told me I was part of the family now. Her voice was warm and full, and she seemed genuinely happy. And then things accelerated. The wedding planning alone, I'll just say this. Within 3 months of the engagement, I had spent $4,300 on deposits for venues and vendors. $1,100 on a bridal shower that Diane declared was a family tradition that she and Brianna had always dreamed of. And $700 on engagement photos at a vineyard in Pittsburgh, because Diane said the photos were essential and she would help with the cost, which in practice meant she Venmo requested me for her own portion 2 weeks later. And I didn't say anything. I kept not saying anything. Meanwhile, Jake's 529 account had $3,200 in it instead of the $5,500 I'd planned. Gracie's account had $1,100. The Carowinds trip happened, finally, but I had to cancel the hotel I'd booked, and instead I drove them down and back in the same day because I couldn't cover the overnight on top of everything else. Jake was fine. Gracie fell asleep in the car on the way back, and held my hand from the back seat for the whole drive home without waking up. That memory lives in my chest like something with teeth. I was building a life with Brianna. At the same time, I was slowly, quietly, incrementally shortchanging the two people who never asked me for anything, who never had to, who were just mine. And I told myself the story the way you do. It's temporary once we're married and stable, once Tyler is sorted, once the wedding is behind us, once. Then came the first week of November. 5 days before the Thanksgiving dinner, I had a good October, closed 4 jumbo loans in the same month, which doesn't happen often. I sat down and I looked at my numbers, and I felt good. I transferred $3,800 into Jake's $529. I transferred $1,600 into Gracie's account. I bought Jake the new bed. I booked a long weekend at a beach house in Emerald Isle for the 3 of us in February. Nothing fancy, but something. I told Brianna, again, what I'd done. I was happy. I said, I've been wanting to catch these accounts up for months. It feels good. She said, that's nice. And then, did you know Tyler got let go again? I said, I didn't know. She said, he's going to need help with rent, probably starting next month. I said, Bree, I just finished telling you about the kids' accounts. She said, I know. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you the situation. And something moved in me right then, something quiet and conclusive, like a door closing softly but firmly in a house that was otherwise absolutely silent. I said, okay, I hear you. That was all I said. That night, I called my dad. His name is Frank. He's 63, retired union electrician, lives in Greensboro. He listens to everything, and then he says one thing, and it's always the right thing. He listened to all of it, not just that night, all of it, the whole 14 months. And he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you feeding someone else's house while your kids go hungry, son. I don't care what kind of hungry it is. Thanksgiving was at Diane's house in Charlotte. Diane had a new dining table, walnut veneer, seats 12, looked like it cost somewhere between $2,000 and $3,000. She'd also had the kitchen backsplash redone, subway tile, very nice, and the living room had 2 new accent chairs that I am almost certain were from West Elm. I am almost certain of this because I have been in a West Elm. I have held those chairs. I recognized the weight of them. I did not ask where the money for any of this came from. I have a guess. Jake and Gracie were not invited. This was framed to me 3 days before as Diane wanting it to be intimate adult family time this particular year. I found out from Brianna, who mentioned it sideways, who did not fully understand what she was handing me, that her cousin's 3 kids were there, ages 8, 6, and 4, and Tyler's girlfriend's daughter, who is 5. There were 4 children at that intimate adult family dinner. None of them were mine. My dad came with me because my mom had a prior commitment with her sister's family, and because Frank, 63, has always shown up for me when it mattered. Dinner was going fine, tense for me, but fine externally, until Diane made a toast. A long one, about family, about love, about what a strong foundation Brianna and I were building. She looked at me warmly the whole time, and something about the warmth made my jaw tight, because I could see the table, I could see the chairs, I could see the backsplash through the kitchen doorway, and I could see the spreadsheet in my head, 14 months of it, and the $3,800 I had finally, just barely, managed to put into Jake's college fund. Brianna said, during a quiet moment at the table, something about the wedding budget and how they were rethinking the venue, because the original one had raised their rate. And then she said, not cruelly, not even really thinking about it, we had to make some adjustments. But we spent your savings on better priorities than your kids. The wedding is what matters right now. The table went quiet. I heard it. My dad heard it. Everyone heard it. I turned to her very slowly and said, better than my kids? Diane smoothly, the woman is smooth, I will give her that, said, you should be proud. You're sacrificing for her family. That's what a good man does. Frank stood up. His chair scraped the hardwood. I had not seen my father's face do that thing in 17 years. He looked at Diane across her own Thanksgiving table with her walnut veneer and her West Elm chairs and her new backsplash, and he said, "Name those priorities right now." Nobody named them. That was the problem. Nobody could. I went quiet. Not upset quiet, done quiet. There's a difference, and people who've been there know it. We stayed through dinner because I was not going to make a scene at someone's table. We ate. My dad was very calm and very still in the way that men who worked union jobs for 30 years get calm and still when they are containing something enormous. In the car on the way home, my dad riding back with me because he had driven his truck to my apartment, he said one thing. He said, "Whatever you decide, I'll be behind it." That was all. I drove home. I sat in my apartment at 11:15 p.m. and I opened my banking app. Not in anger, not dramatically, just in the specific, clear-headed way that you operate a piece of machinery when you know exactly what it needs to do. I had a recurring transfer, $900 a month, set up 18 months ago, going into a joint account that Brianna had access to. Intended originally as a wedding fund, but used in practice for a number of things that were not the wedding. I tapped it twice. Gone. The transfer was canceled. Then I sat there for a minute and I thought about Diane's new table and the backsplash and the chairs and Jake's 529 account with $3,800 in it after 9 years of him being alive. And something else occurred to me. Okay, so here's the part of the story where I need you to understand something about me. I am a mortgage broker. My entire professional existence is built around documentation, specifics, and the formalization of financial agreements. I am not chaotic. I am deeply, almost pathologically organized. I have color-coded folders. I have a label maker. My car is clean. What I did next was organized. It was extremely organized. It was, I want to be very precise about this, the most organized thing I have ever done in my personal life. I stayed up until 2 a.m. and I created a document. It was titled, and I am reading this to you verbatim, Informal Summary of Financial Contributions, November 2022 through November 2024. A. Harrison to Watkins Family Unit, 31 pages. I want you to feel the weight of that number, 31 pages. Because I had the receipts, I had the Venmo records, I had the bank transfers, I had the screenshots. I am a mortgage broker. I had everything. Every dinner, every car, every weekend trip, every just this once that became every month. Itemized, dated, annotated. Total $23,440. $23,440 over 26 months. I also included, in a section I labeled Opportunity Cost Projections, what $23,440 would have done if it had been put into Jake's 529 account at a standard market growth rate over A. 20-year horizon. The number it produced, and I am not making this up, was $68,917. Then I printed 11 copies, which is exactly the number of adults who had been at Thanksgiving dinner, plus Brianna's aunt in Florida who wasn't there, but who I knew would hear about this within 48 hours. I mailed them. Certified mail, each one addressed individually, by name, with a personal cover letter that was polite, specific, and contained not a single unkind word. The cover letter said only, I wanted to make sure everyone had the full picture of the financial foundation we have been building together. I believe in transparency. Andy. I genuinely did not plan for what happened next, not even a little. The first call came from Tyler at 6:47 a.m. on the Monday after Thanksgiving. He did not get through. I let it go to voicemail. By 9 a.m., there were 14 missed calls. 6 from Diane, 4 from Tyler, 2 from Brianna, 1 from Brianna's Aunt Karen, who lived in Fort Lauderdale and had indeed received her certified copy, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Diane's neighbor Patty, who had been shown the document over coffee and apparently felt she had something to say about it. Patty. Diane's neighbor Patty, who I had met once. Brianna showed up at my apartment at 11:30. I opened the door. She had printed pages in her hand, her own copy, and her face was somewhere between furious and something else I couldn't quite name. She started talking, and I let her talk. And at some point, she said, "You made us look like," and I said very quietly, "Brianna, this is just accounting. This is what happened. The numbers aren't opinions." She left. The door closed. I sat back down. My phone buzzed. A text from Tyler that said, "You think you're so smart, huh?" I noted the absence of punctuation and did not respond. Then the group chat. I was not in the group chat. It was the Watkins family group, which I had never been added to, but Brianna had her phone on the counter when she came over. And I later heard from my dad, who heard from my mom, who heard from Brianna's Aunt Karen, who had apparently defected, that the messages had included the following. Diane posting, "This is an absolute betrayal of this family and I am heartbroken," followed by Tyler posting a series of emojis that my dad described as the angry red face and something else, followed by Brianna's cousin Rachel, whose 3 kids had been at Thanksgiving while mine were not, posting, "Okay, but those numbers though," followed by Diane again. "Rachel, you are not helping." Rachel was the crack in the dam, because Rachel is 41 and she had been watching the Diane and Tyler dynamic for a decade longer than I had. And apparently, the document had named several amounts that even Rachel hadn't known about. And it had surfaced in her a whole separate sea of things she had been quietly carrying. Rachel texted me directly that afternoon from her personal number. She said, "I cannot stop laughing at opportunity cost projections. Andy, I'm sorry, but I cannot stop laughing." I texted back, "Standard practice in my field." She sent back 3 laughing, crying emojis. And then the part where the footnote says, "inclusive of market rate appreciation, but not adjusted for emotional labor." I've been in this family for 15 years, and you have described it perfectly. I genuinely had not meant that footnote to be funny. That was just how I write documents. By Wednesday of that week, the document had, and I'm going to say this very carefully, achieved its own independent life. Karen in Fort Lauderdale had shown it to her book club. Her book club had apparently found it riveting, in the way that a particularly organized piece of chaos is always riveting. One of the women in the book club had texted it to her daughter, who posted a portion of it, specifically the opportunity cost projections table, on a Reddit personal finance thread under the title, "My friend's ex-fiancé actually made a spreadsheet." And it had gotten, at last count, when someone screenshotted it for me, 4,200 upvotes. The Reddit thread. I need you to let that land. There were comments. There were many comments. The top one said, "This man is not a fiancé. This man is a forensic accountant with feelings, and I respect him completely." It had 1,700 upvotes. The second comment said, "The footnote about emotional labor not being adjusted for in the market rate projection is going to live in my mind forever." I did not plan for the Reddit thread. I also did not plan for my colleague Marcus. Marcus Webb, who is 44 and has worked in the office next to mine for 6 years, and who I had never once discussed my personal life with in any detail, who knocked on my door on Thursday morning and said very gently, "Hey man, is this you?" and showed me his phone. It was the Reddit post. I looked at him for a moment. I said, "Yeah." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "The footnote got me." He shook my hand, very formally, and went back to his office. That was the whole conversation. It was somehow one of the most meaningful professional interactions of my life. Diane called on Thursday evening. Not the missed call kind of calling, the real kind, I answered, because I believed she deserved a real conversation. She was not warm the way she had been on the night of the engagement. She was cold in that specific way that people who are used to controlling things get cold when the controls stop working. She said, "You humiliated this family." I said, "Diane, I sent a financial summary to people who were present at a dinner where I was told that my children are a lower priority than your kitchen renovation." Silence. "Then that's not what was meant." I said, "I know what was meant. I was there." More silence. And then she said something that surprised me. She said, "Tyler is going to pay you back." He said, "Tyler had never once said so about anything to me." But I said, "Okay." There was a longer silence. And then Diane said, in a voice that had lost something, Not the warmth, but whatever she used to perform the warmth. She loves you, you know. I said, I know. I said, I love her too. She hung up. Brianna and I talked for a long time that Saturday, sat on my couch with the TV off and talked for 4 hours, which is probably the longest serious conversation we'd ever had. She cried at multiple points. I cried at one, which was when I explained about the Carowinds trip and the hotel I'd had to cancel, and Gracie asleep in the back seat, holding my hand, and me sitting there on that drive home, feeling like I had failed both of them simultaneously. She hadn't known about the hotel. That landed differently on her than I expected. She was quiet for a long time. She said, "Why didn't you ever tell me no? Why didn't you just tell me no?" And I said, "I did. The security deposit, I told you no about that." She thought about it. Yeah. She said, "Yeah, you did." She said, "I think I've been doing something without really looking at it." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I think my mom does something where I don't have the full word for it, but she makes me feel like the right thing to do is always the thing that protects her." And I imported that into us. I didn't say anything. She said, "I'm not making excuses." I said, "I know." My dad came over that Sunday. He brought soup. He makes this potato soup from a recipe that was his mother's and that he only makes for serious occasions. And we ate it at my kitchen table, and he asked me what I was thinking. I told him I didn't know yet. About Brianna, about any of it. He said, "The ring don't have to be a final word. Rings come and go. Kids don't." I said, "I know, Dad." He said, "You're a good father, Andy. You've been trying to be a good partner, too." Those two things just got mixed up. We finished the soup and watched football and didn't talk about any of it anymore. 3 weeks later, Brianna started seeing a therapist. Not for me, for herself, for the specific pattern her mother had installed in her over 31 years. She told me this herself, without me asking, which matters. Tyler did not pay me back. Tyler will not pay me back. I've made my peace with it. The $23,440 is a lesson I have now fully purchased. But here's what is true. Jake's $529 account is now at $6,100. I set up an automatic transfer, $400 a month, recurring, the first of every month. Gracie's account hit $2,800 in January. The Emerald Isle Beach House trip happened in February. 3 days, me and Jake and Gracie, cold and windy and absolutely perfect. Gracie drew horses in the sand for an hour and a half straight. Jake found a crab and named it Derek. Derek was released back into the Atlantic Ocean in good health. Brianna and I are not engaged anymore. We are talking, slowly, carefully, like two people who broke something expensive and are looking at the pieces with their hands behind their backs, not sure yet if they trust themselves to try to fix it. She drove down from Charlotte 2 weekends ago, and the three of us, her, me, and my dad, sat around and ate the potato soup again. And nothing was solved, but something was present that hadn't been there in a while. Honesty, maybe. Just that. Are we a perfect family now? No. We're not even really a family in the traditional sense. We're figuring out what we are. Healing doesn't move in a straight line. It moves in this strange, sideways, 2 steps back way that nobody prepares you for. There are good weeks and bad weeks. There are weeks where Brianna and I don't talk, and I don't know what that means. There are weeks where Jake texts me random baseball stats at midnight, and Gracie sends me photos of her drawings, and I sit there looking at my phone in the dark, feeling like the luckiest person alive. The Reddit thread is still up, by the way. Last time someone showed me, the opportunity cost projections footnote had been quoted in a completely separate thread about financial literacy in relationships. My document is apparently now a reference text. I did not plan for that. Marcus Webb put a copy of the cover letter, not the full document, just the letter, on his bulletin board. I asked him why. He said, "Because it's the most polite thing I have ever seen a human being do in a complicated situation. I want to aspire to that. I don't know what to do with that, so I've just left it." The one thing I know for certain, Jake's bed arrived on a Tuesday in December. A full-sized, solid wood platform bed. Nothing fancy, Exactly what a 9-year-old needs. He stood in the doorway of his room and looked at it, and then looked at me and said, "Dad, this is the most comfortable looking bed I've ever seen in my life." He had this expression of complete, uncomplicated happiness. I said, "Yeah, bud?" He said, "Yeah." He slept in it for 11 hours straight.